Just waiting now for Reverend Aaron Long to join us as we probably will discuss some more about Aimee Byrd. Let's see what if we have any further thoughts on that scenario. Here comes Aaron.
There we go.
Hi, Aaron.
The weather around here is terrible. I don't know what it's like where you're at.
It's wet and kind of cool.
Well, I like the cold. I ain't going to complain about that.
Yeah.
But so, how's your reading going, Donald?
Well, I just got yesterday in the mail the last three books of Aimee Byrd, and I just started the first book she wrote in 2013, and it's actually not too bad, actually. It did raise the question, though, should women be writing books? Because they end up teaching men. I'm not sure that crossed her mind. Some interesting things. She said that she discusses the tension that was introduced into marriage after the fall, and that her husband, Matt, has a strong personality, and she has a strong personality that created some tensions and obstacles in their early marriage. Um, she said she has very strong opinions, but actually, I can't find too much that is bad. She even puts in a good word, believe it or not, for John Piper's Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. This is, of course, before she wrote her book in 2021, Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Biblical Womanhood, where she takes the gloves off variously in that book, which got her in trouble in the OPC. So we'll see how the trajectory goes. These three books were written, I believe, a couple of them before the 2021 wallpaper book. So I still haven't finished the review of Byrd, but she really angered some people. I did read where the General Assembly rebuked the Southeast Diocese for not handling the situation very well. But so I've still got work to do. Otherwise, I'm doing my other theological readings. I would note that you are a very popular figure. And one person said on a comment on the YouTube that the YouTube with you, Reverend Long, should be sent to every OPC church.
Well, can I make an observation based on what you just shared?
Yeah.
All right, I want to go back to what you said, your thoughts about women writing. Personally, I don't have a problem with it at all because it is the idea of it. I get where you're coming from and I get where your positioning is on it. Where I see the problem is not whether it is men or women writing, it is going back to the principles we started off when we started talking about the souls. As you look at Aimee Byrd, what you see is an individual that drank deeply from wells over the course of her career that led her down the path to heresy and apostasy. The problem really stems from the fact that the denominations are not breaking harder on a solid confessional position, and they are allowing opinions to creep into the church that drift off. What I see with Aimee is this, it's what I saw with a lot of people going into seminary. Now, a lot of hay has been made over people saying this about kids leaving home and going to college. But from my personal experience, a worse transformation occurs with the seminaries. Because what happens is you start off with people with a naive, but for the most part, genuine faith. They may have some problems, but all beginning seminarians are going to have rough patches. I think you can agree with me on that. Part of the process should be sanding down the rough patches. But instead of sanding down the rough patches, what ends up happening is they get introduced progressively to these almost demonic writers and these almost, and I'm not even going to say almost, these demonic thought processes. And they creep in and they start to twist these younger clergymen, these women, all the rest of it into something that is unchristian. You get introduced, and sometimes I think it's done by the professors from a place of wanting to equip people. I'm not going to necessarily badmouth all of them. I do think there are more bad actors than good actors in the professorships. But what ends up happening is they introduce people like Marcus Borg, or I'm thinking back to the writers that I got thrown at me when I was in seminary, Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox is the process theologian who is a Franciscan. Marcus Borg is a Lutheran theologian that is just completely apostate. You get introduced to these people. Karl Barth, I had to read Barth, and they're not fully formed when they're thrown to these wolves. And it ends up transforming the way they think, that by the time they graduated, by the time they finish their reading process, they have become just as apostate as the people that they were forced to read. And I firmly, on a level, believe that this problem comes from multiple angles operating at the same time. The first is the denominations. The OPC and the PCA and most denominations make a lot of comments and rattle a lot of swords about being confessional when they're really not, because they allow for exceptions. They do all this. The other thing is they're all functionally postmodern in and of the fact that they're concerned about affirming people's feelings. You can't affirm people's feelings when you're training clergy. A clergyman that affirms people's feelings and worries about that, somebody's emotional state over their eternal soul, is just going to lead them to hell in the process.
You've raised that before, emotion over subjectivism over being.
Subjectivism.
Yeah, I've been personally struggling with that in this sense that every day I'm in the best classics you can read,
Mm-hmm.
very intellectual. And I back away from it and I say, Lord, is this inspiring in me the appropriate affections? So that's a prayer that I have so that it's not just totally intellectualized, reformed intellectualism, reformed elitism, because I'm reading the best guys out there. So that's something I have my eye on.
But Donald, we're talking from two different perspectives. You are coming from a place of your formation started at your father's knee. You
Yeah.
were solidly grounded in the Westminster Shorter, in the Bible, in the Christian faith. You were rooted before you started this process. So your mind has been trained, your worldview has been formed in such a way that you can go back and deal with your religious affections from that point.
Yeah.
The problem is in the churches, they are starting from the point of emotionalism. This is a poisonous outgrowth of the Second Great Awakening. You
And
see it.
the contemporary Christian worship.
Well, the contemporary Christian worship is nothing but Pentecostal and revivalist worship that has been translated into the modern setting. So it's completely based off of emotional affection.
Yeah.
I'm not saying emotions and feelings are bad. I'm saying that rational logic and the biblical text must be the queen, and the emotions and the feelings must be the handmaid. And the problem is people are making their emotions and feelings the queen and making their logic and rationality in the biblical text the handmaid. Otherwise, we would not have women's ordination. We would not have support of the LGBTQ community within the church. Because if you will go back and you will dig through the arguments for those things, all of them are based on emotion. And I'm going to make a statement that may be somewhat unpopular with some of your constituency. Kinism is not derived from the biblical text nor from the logical rational mind, because what the Bible clearly teaches is God only sees the elect and the reprobate. Race is a secondary concern to God over the elect versus the reprobate. Therefore, Kinism itself is based in the same way that the progressives and the liberals derive their opinions. Kinism is based off of emotion and feeling over logical rationality or the biblical text.
What, I don't know if I got any kinist friends. How do you define kinism?
Kinism is approaching things from a race-centered perspective. Like we only want white churches or we only want black churches. It's speaking of Christianity and racial concepts. Unfortunately, Dabney gave them a lot of their structure. It's why, as much as I adore Dabney, he's got some issues, and he's got some issues that derive from the time period in which he wrote.
Well, I just read Mark Spangler or Mike
Yeah.
Mark Spangler's racist realism or realism of racism, in which he affirms and wants others to affirm, appreciate, and assert racial differences. And I really need to reread that. I'm not sure what he's getting at. I mean,
Well, we can get into that at a later date
yeah,
because that goes. But the thing is ultimately it is the problem of modern Western society recovering from World War II. On the race issue and on all the rest of this, we have been given by the powers that be a false dynamic. And I am actually not saying this from a conspiratorial situation. I'm saying it because if you go back and you read the documentation, it was purposefully done. We have considered and been taught that Nazism and fascism are the far right, whereas communism and socialism are on the left. In all honesty, Nazism and fascism are different forms of socialist movements. If you read Hitler's Mein Kampf, he was a right-wing socialist. If you study Benito Mussolini, he was just as much a socialist as FDR was. And because of World War II and what grew out of it and the Cold War, we have the powers that be have created a false right-left dynamic that is actually not true. It should be progressivism versus traditionalism, which the progressives would be basically both your Kenists and your liberals and your progressives and all of them who want to overthrow the confessional biblical concepts, whereas your traditionalists are going to rally back around what the church has always taught. What hath God said?
yeah.
We are not going to allow this stuff to creep in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just started and opened an inquiry rereading Philip Schaff's Creeds of Christendom.
I like that series.
Oh, that is a fantastic series. Yeah, so he starts and he goes through all the creeds, Greek, Roman.
You can thank us for Schaff. We're the one that brought him over here from Europe.
Oh man, I don't always agree with him at points.
Well, by the time he became a Presbyterian, he had functionally become a 18th century progressive theologically. His theology had drifted, but as a historian, you're not going to find many people that are better.
Yeah.
He is hands down. Oh, sorry. So the problem that is arising that we're seeing is stemming from the educational system and the weak-willed nature of the denominations. It starts from lacking formation. It starts from elevating subjectivism over objectivism or feeling over thought. And finally, it stems from the fact that our seminaries, our denominations are littered with clergy who have never been forced to spend 20 years in a parish or a chaplaincy. I am of the opinion no one should be hired to teach at a seminary. No one should be elected to a major office within a denomination until they have been forced to spend 15 to 20 years in a local church.
Well, I have criticized Westminster Seminary for that very thing. Vern Poythress, for example, no pastoral experience. John Frame, had him for apologetics, no pastoral experience. Norman Shepherd, the heretic, no pastoral experience at all. Alan Charles Gelzo of Reformed Episcopal, no pastoral experience. Leonard Riches, the presiding bishop, 2 to 3 years in the pastorate, and then he came over into seminary. His son, Jonathan Richards, no pastoral experience.
But that's what's going on. Byrd, on a level, it's sort of funny, both Byrd and Spangler are victims. And I know it's going to be odd from some of the people hearing me say this. They're actually victims of a system that creates people like them. Byrd did not have solid formation. Otherwise, she would not have drifted. Spangler was attacked for speaking the truth by a denomination that is more concerned about people's feelings than the truth, and he drifted. All of these people are actually ultimately abuse survivors, to use your language, to use your psychological language. The denominations have become abusive to their people, and they do it by thinking they're doing the right thing. They do it by affirmation, which is just ultimately it's like this. Think about the denomination as a parent and the clergy and the laity as children. You had children. Which is harder to do when your child is throwing a fit? When your child's out in public and having a fit, is it harder to take them outside and wear their tail out? Or is it harder to just give them what they want and let them go on with life, to shut them up? It's harder to take the child by the hand or the ear, take them out to the car and wear their tail out than it is just to buy them the toy they're crying about.
That's right.
But the problem is what that is a form of abuse. Now, the modern world would say spanking the child is abuse. No, it's not. Spare the rod, spoil the child. That is not the abuse. The abuse is when you let this little titty baby have a hissy fit and then you give them what they're having the hissy fit, because what ends up happening is you're encouraging and teaching them if they'll whine and throw a fit. We see this in society today. Think about all these blue-haired, ballless wonders out there protesting everywhere. You know why they're protesting? They've never had to work a damn job a day. Sorry for my language, a day in their life. They've never actually had to struggle. I go back to the seminaries. I don't want to hear somebody that went from college to seminary to grad school and then back to seminary trying to teach me how to pastor a church. Because I'm going to tell you what, you don't know jack squat about what you're talking about. You can have all the paper hanging on your wall you want until you've had to be up at midnight because somebody had a car accident, or you've had to deal with elders trying to stab you in the back, or you've had to live in a parsonage that's falling apart because they don't care about it. You don't know what it means to be a pastor. You have no right teaching other pastors. Sorry, I get real fired up about that. Till you got skin in the game, keep your damn mouth shut.
You know, talk about conflicts in the seminaries. Have probably told you this story before of my dad at Knox College, University
Mhm.
of Toronto. It was the grad
Oh
school.
yeah, you've told me that story.
Yeah, and the great fight that arose between the New Testament and Old Testament man on the floor, my dad standing up in the pulpit,
Mhm.
and that Old Testament libo said, you know, to my dad, you keep up that kind of preaching, and I'm going to make sure you can only get a church in Labrador. And it really shook my dad up. As a young guy just out of World War II and the Navy, and quickly finished his bachelor's and then on to Knox. Then they sang that song, unbeknownst to him, as the closing hymn, Jesus paid it all to him I owe. And my dad had preached a classic Anselmian on the doctrine of penal, substitutionary, vicarious atonement and the imputation of Christ's righteousness, something that's standard Reformed doctrines.
Mhm.
He got smacked around. Fortunately, the New Testament man, Dr. Glenn, stood up and defended Dad's sermon, but that was the late 40s, but you can see the corruption at Knox College even in the 40s in Canadian Presbyterianism.
Well, imagine I went to a seminary where all the professors, except for one, were like that Old Testament professor.
Oh man.
But the thing is, Donald, I am so sick of what I see being spewed out of NAPARC schools and NAPARC denominations. And then the denominations run around and whining that they're confessional when they're actually the ones that are producing these things like Aimee Byrd. And they're doing it not because it's Aimee's fault. I mean, I guess indirectly, you know what I'm saying, but because they're not forcing their churches to actually do what they're supposed to do. Whatever happened, and Nevin left the Presbyterians over this single issue. I know you're going to get sick of hearing me talk about Nevin and Schaff. Nevin starts the Mercersburg movement. Nevin ends up German Reformed because the Presbyterians stopped forcing their clergy to catechize their children, stopped forcing their clergy to force them to memorize the Westminster Shorter. And this is people that Hodge trained. I'm not saying Hodge did, but when you get into the presbyteries and all that, they were more concerned, the New Lights were more concerned with revival and experience and all of this. And sorry, Jonathan Edwards and the First Great Awakening, the whole lot of it, this experiential Christianity, that they forgot what Christianity was. And what you're doing is you're throwing these children, these teenagers out into the world with no Christian formation and then wondering why they come back like the world. You see it by them not pushing the issue of church schools. There is no reason whatsoever that the Presbyterians couldn't do what the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church has done. Explain to me why there is not a Presbyterian school, at least through eighth grade, attached to every PCA or OPC church over 300 members. The Missouri Synod keep their people, and for the most part, outside of the heretics that bought into the contemporary worship stuff, they keep their people solid because I want you to pay attention to this. Look and see how many Missouri Synod Lutheran churches have a Christian school attached. There's only one in this area, St. John's in Winston. And sure enough, guess what's sitting right beside the church? kindergarten through 8th grade.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Completely.
But no,
We here have 120,000 in Jacksonville.
Mhm.
Most of that's military. We have one Christian school run by Assemblies of God.
Mhm.
That's it.
Right.
We also have one run by the Catholics, Roman Catholics.
Well, now I will say, even though I would never agree with them theologically, pre-Vatican II Roman Catholic education system was par excellence.
Yeah.
Post-Vatican II, if you go to a Catholic school, if you Roman Catholic school, if you study on it, they're no different really than the public schools and what they teach.
Yeah.
But
Prof. A. Hodge at the end of the 19th century was lamenting the loss of Christian schools and the advance of public education, and predicted that it would produce the greatest force for nihilism.
and it has.
It has, yes.
But no, you want to fix these denominations. The first thing they have to do is they have to clean out before they go back to their confessions and all the rest of it. The first thing they do is they have to take the trash out at the top. And I'm going to tell you, you know what would fix the REC right now? What would fix the REC right now is get rid of all salaries for bishops and for anybody above the level of a local church. And I would say that for moderators of presbyteries and all their organizations and all the rest. I would say that across the board, Donald. Put into their constitutions that the highest level of paid employee is the pastor of a local church. If you are going to take a denominational position, be it because we put that when we restarted the Evangelical and Reformed Church, it is embedded in our Constitution. No one above the local pastor will derive a salary for their job. And my argument for it was this: I have to ask laity in my church to run for elders and deacons to sit on consistory, to do work above and beyond the call of duty, to aid me. I mean, it's in their ordination and installation service, to be my eyes and ears, hands and feet amongst the congregation. And they don't get a dime for doing it. They don't even get reimbursed half the time. They put their own money in. How can I look at my people and say, you need to give money to a denomination and we're going to send it up top to people that you may see once or twice a year that don't do anything but ultimately cause problems?
Yeah, I don't know what could be done to the REC to fix
Well, you
its.
get rid of the salaries and see how many of them go scattering.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that.
I mean, if you're going to be a bishop, that's fine. But you were the pastor to the pastors, and you should be doing it because it's a calling. And if it's a calling, you need to just do it. Jesus didn't take a salary. Why would you? St. Paul goes on that he did not take money from these people, even though he could have claimed it.
Yeah.
I believe that the local pastor, you don't muzzle the ox while he's treading grain. Anything above him should be because God's laid a burden on your heart and you need to do it. But if you do that, you will get rid of the dead wood at the top right off the bat. And then what you'll get are men that are committed to actually doing the job and fulfilling the calling.
I think John Wycliffe would totally agree with you.
And then you allow those men to go through and enforce the confessions and catechisms.
On that point, the Northern Presbyterians were weaker on catechesis, but down here in the South, it was distinctively different.
Right.
Catechesis was pressured and pressed, even here in town. down at the First Presbyterian Church, they used to require memorization of the shorter catechism. I'm talking like the 1960s and 70s before you could become a communicant member in the church.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir, Donald. I was talking to them about this at the Heidelberg Catechism study I'm doing on Thursdays.
Yeah.
Mama Snyder, I have her catechism at my house that she got in 32. She had to memorize all 129 questions and answers and not just stand before the elders. She had to walk pew by pew through Beulah Reformed Church, and there would be somebody, a church member, sitting at the end of every pew that would ask her a question with their catechism out in front of them, and she would have to respond with the correct answer. And then when she got up front, the elders and the pastor were up there, and then they would question her about her personal Christian conduct and development. Then and only then could she be confirmed and be able to go to communion.
How old was she when she became a communicant member?
You're going to make me do math. I think 11.
Whoa.
Till the
Whoa.
day she died back in 2020, November or in October 31st of 2023, she could still, at 96 years old, she could still recite most of the catechism from memory.
Now, historically, the Christian Reformed and today the Protestant Reformed, they have all Christian schools.
Right.
They have them attached. And I know the Protestant Reformed, you get the catechism for year in, year out. And you don't become a communicant member until you've passed those kind of testings.
Mm-hmm.
It's at age 18, not 12, but 18. They make sure that you are thorough in your knowledge. And it's continuing to this day. And there's
Well, I'm going to tell you, I picked up some Scandinavians from Minnesota, Audrey and Bob Lambert, that are in the church. And Audrey's been coming, they're about your age. And Audrey and Bob have been coming to Thursday morning Bible study because they retired. And she was talking on last Thursday when she was growing up. They were given a copy of Luther's Small with the explanation to it, and they had to memorize the whole thing. And they had to be able to go through. And I mean, when I say the whole thing, I'm not just talking about the questions and answers. They had to memorize the table of scriptures in the back of it. They had to memorize morning and evening prayer. They had to memorize the table blessings, and they had to go through that. What that is formation.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, ultimately, we are stuck in the place we're in because the supposedly confessional churches are ultimately so rotten on the inside because they've really given up on first principles. I had Dr. JT Brantley, and I know you and him have had some ups and downs.
Cool.
He's down at Boger. He's my assistant bishop. He's the one that's going over to Africa in September.
Okay.
He's at Boger Reform. But we were talking a couple of weeks ago, and we were discussing church growth. Now, Boger is an incredibly rural church. It's really in the middle of nowhere. And he said he is a firm believer in the historic pattern of church growth. It starts with solid catechesis, solid liturgy, and preaching the gospel Sunday after Sunday. And I got to thinking about what he was saying. That's it. You need those three elements to be able to grow a church. You do not need marketing technology or technique. You do not need celebrity pastors. You do not need any of that garbage. You need solid catechesis. And whatever form you do that in, because I mean, like the PRCNA, they every Sunday night they have a service where the pastor is required to preach the Heidelberg.
Yep.
Or the old Westminster churches or our churches made you memorize it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then a solid liturgy. And the thing with the liturgy is ultimately the liturgy is a catechetical tool.
Yeah.
You're familiar with Cranmer.
Yeah.
I would say all Presbyterian liturgy is hot garbage, and one of the biggest mistakes they made was not keeping the Book of Common Prayer.
I agree.
Cranmer's order for Holy Communion
Yep.
follows the exact same pattern the Heidelberg Catechism itself does: guilt, grace, gratitude.
Yeah.
You come in after the opening prayer, which I get, you say the Decalogue, because the Decalogue then shows you your guilt.
Yep.
Then you go into the Gospel, Epistle, and Creed. It shows you God's grace. And then you respond with gratitude with the offering and with the prayer.
Yep.
Holy Communion then starts. You see your guilt through the confession of sins. You see God's grace in the words of institution and in the prayer over the elements. You show your gratitude by the prayer of thanksgiving afterward. The liturgy itself catechizes. I tell them all the time, I cannot stand Anglican churches that refuse to say the Ten Commandments every Sunday.
I agree.
Because I make my people every Sunday say the Ten Commandments, the Apostles' Creed, and the Lord's Prayer. I said, even if I have a turd burger of a sermon, the gospel's gotten out there, because the Ten Commandments show us our guilt, the Apostles' Creed shows us God's grace, and the Lord's Prayer shows our gratitude for what God has done for us.
Yeah.
But
that's one thing I miss at Covenant ARP is the liturgy. We sing 2 to 3 psalms out of 4 hymns. We read a Psalter selection. We read a New Testament selection, but there's no Old Testament selection. And then we get the pastoral prayer, which I was thinking this yesterday. The cat kicked my door open. Um, there's no confession of sin per se. It comes in the pastoral prayer, but he prays around the world. You never know where he's going to go. And I don't fault or criticize him. He's a dear brother and he's committed to scripture and he preaches good sermons. But it's not I miss the old prayer book liturgy. And I agree with you that I think the Presbyterians erred greatly, or the Church of England erred greatly when in the interregnum when they brought in, thankfully, the Westminster Standards, but threw out the prayer book. That was a gross mistake. And then a great mistake in 1662 when they throw the Westminster Standards out and restore the prayer book.
But the thing is catechism and liturgy go hand in hand.
Yes.
Because the liturgy itself is a form of catechism.
Yes.
When my kids come to me in confirmation, they already have the Ten Commandments, Apostles' Creed, and Lord's Prayer memorized because they've said it Sunday by Sunday.
That's one thing that struck me. Well, yesterday, or Sunday, I should say, today's Wednesday, Tuesday. First of all, the church was packed, more so than normal, which we have here in Jacksonville, a turnover in August timeframe, shifting people out to other bases, some coming in. So, the place was packed more than ever before. But one thing and a lot of young families and a lot of young kids, and what struck me, and I like to look around at the kids when they do the Apostles' Creed or the Lord's Prayer or singing the doxology or the benediction, um, glory be to the Father. They all know the hymns and those portions and they say them or sing them. See their little mouths moving and you go, yeah, this kid is learning by just hearing it.
And that's why the liturgy is as important as the catechism.
Yeah.
And it's because it forms you. The church building itself I purposely set up and have inherited a church with, I see the cat, with a distinct, the cat showed up in the back. I purposefully have talked about this before at Paul's Chapel. I keep the baptismal font in the back unless I'm baptizing, and then I bring it up front. But it sits near the door because what it represents it is that through the waters of baptism, you come into the covenant family. As you walk down the aisle, you see the body of Christ gathered together along the long beam of the cross. When you get up to the front, you've got the pulpit and the lectern as the two arms of the cross where the word is read and the word is expounded. And then when you get up to the altar is the head of the cross where we offer our prayers and offer the Holy Communion up to God. The sanctuary itself becomes a catechetical tool. I point out to them all the time, the choir sits facing the altar. It doesn't sit facing the congregation, because what that teaches them, because our choir, we have a different form of the standard English choir law. The choir is not singing to entertain anybody. The choir is singing praise unto God. If they're out here standing in the front, it's like a show. If they're standing in their pews, they face the altar. And I'm not pushing east, west, whatever, but I mean, if they're facing the altar, it shows they're purposefully singing to praise God.
What explanation do you offer for the two positions of the pulpit and the reading lectern?
All right. My take on it is, and I don't know if anybody's ever said this before, the pulpit is honestly a sign of office. The lectern is where anybody that is in the church can come and speak to the congregation. We have a rule. Nobody can be in the pulpit unless I have given permission, and the pulpit can only be occupied by an ordained pastor who is going to preach, because that is how highly we reverence the preached word of God. Consistory president, we have congregational meetings up here. The consistory president always speaks from the lectern. If I'm doing a funeral and some of the family members want to come up and speak, I have no problem with that, but they're going to speak from the lectern.
Gotcha.
And it is not some weird papist liturgical thing. It is an elevation of the word of God above. The pulpit is almost sacred. Does that make any sense?
Yep.
There is a sacramental nature to the word preached.
Yep.
And you wouldn't just use your communion cup and you wouldn't just use your chalice and paten to eat lunch off of.
Yeah.
It's not saying that we believe in some sort of magical transformation or anything like that, but they represent something. They represent something sacred.
Yeah.
And I have a problem with center pulpits simply because it ceases to be a sacred space and it just becomes the podium from which you speak to the church, whether it be somebody from the Women's Guild coming up and talking about a quilting circle or the preacher delivering a gospel message out of the Bible. It's not really special, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It's been explained to me that the pulpit is subordinate to the reading lectern, where the word of God is pure, perfect, infallible, sovereign, but the pulpit is subordinate in that the minister can make a mistake compared to the reading of God's word. At least that's how Bishop Herder explained it to me once. And I've
And
never heard it discussed.
the problem with that is what that is saying, that is elevating the simple reading of the word over the expounding, which none of the reformers would agree with.
Yeah, that's one place in the confession where I take a bit of exception, which is very rare, which talks about the preaching of the word being the ordinary means of uh, regeneration and conversion. But then it adds in a little clause and says, but also the reading of the scriptures. So I would reverse that and say it is principally the reading of the scriptures that are elevated above preaching.
But that's my thing. But no, I mean, to get back to where we were, I have over time come to the conclusion that people like Byrd and people like the guy in the PCA that started Revoice are
I got,
actually,
by the way, I got this Johnson's book,
yeah, that's his name. They
Still
are
Still Time to Care. Is
they are actually victims of the denomination, not enforcing what it says it believes.
Yeah, what's the story behind this Johnson guy? Side B, side A? I don't.
All right, simply because I don't necessarily want to drift into him today. What he is espousing is what he calls side B Christianity. That God created and made people who have homosexual desires to be homosexual. And he said they should proudly live as homosexual, but they should not sin. They should not commit the act of sodomy. He is not saying that homosexuality itself is a sin. He is saying that the act of sodomy is a sin,
Gotcha. Yeah.
which is a whole bunch of words to say you just want to slip in and let the gay agenda take over, and you're just dressing it up in a way to where you can play with the words and say, no, I did not support sodomy.
Well, right now I'm touching on the hot button issues that I've never followed through on. Number one is this question of uh, anti-sodomy, pro-sodomy, and I'm influenced by very successfully by Robert Gagnon's.
Mhm.
I'm also so the gay issues. Secondly, women's ordination is something I'm working on, and third, I'm working on uh, this Aimee Byrd scenario, which is really an expression of evangelical feminism of some kind. So these are hot button issues that were never issues for me before, you know.
Because you were cloistered away in your monastery on the boat and on the base.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I told you that story about me having in 1991 to
Mhm.
go before the U.S. Senate Armed Forces Committee. Did I tell you that?
Uh-uh.
Oh, wow. We got in from sea one day, and the next morning we gathered in the for officers call at 7 a.m. And the executive officer, all the officers were gathered. He said, "You got to go over to such and such building. The U.S. Senate Armed Forces Committee is meeting." This was in Norfolk. And the whole issue was allowing gays into the military. And this was Bill Clinton's project, 1991. Well, I was scared. I was a young lieutenant, you know, and what am I going to say? So I went over to, and it was meeting like 10-ish in the morning. This is 7 a.m. So I'm kind of panicking because, you know, your career could be on the line because you're opposing the president. And I went over to a Southern Baptist, the senior commander at the Sinklant Fleet level, and asked for his counsel. And he said, "Well, just remember this, you're on your own." And I thought the Southern Baptists loved the Bible. And he's telling me, I said, "Well, I guess I'll just teach them what I've always believed is, as a confessional Christian. He says, yeah, do that. So I got no support. Anyways, I go over to this building and here's U.S. senators and their staff sitting up front in chairs and tables. And there were 6 of us. We were all handpicked. 3 of them were women, 3 of them were men. Uh, 2 of them were evangelical. The men were all evangelical. But as the questions got going, we were all scared. And I could see a couple of my male counterparts were kind of weak in expression. And then it came to me, and I had just been preaching on the 10 Commandments while we were at sea. And I covered the 7th commandment against homosexuality, against fornication, against adultery, against bestiality, against thoughts and ideas, not just the acts, but also the intentions of the heart. So I started expounding that in light of my my instruction, which was still fresh in my mind. And I said one thing. And by the way, when I started talking, no more questions from the senators. Everybody's sitting there and scratching away and writing because there was no internet, or, back then you wrote it on paper. And I did what I did. I said, if they make it where I have to say that homosexuality is not a sin, then you're going to have to court martial me because I cannot say that. Well, we finished. A couple of the women, we all gathered outside the chaplains, and 2 of the women said, "Oh, you're just one of those bookmen." I said, "Yeah, I am." But when I got going, the other 2 evangelical males, they started jumping in too, positively.
Mhm.
Well, that finished that, and I got back to the boat, and a commander, one level above me, a Roman priest, called me and said, "I heard what you did, and I'm calling you to let you know I'm going to do everything in my power to get you promoted." Okay, well, that happened later. Well, a few months later, after this is all over, I had a chaplain come on board who's going to relieve me. I was going to rotate out, he's going to rotate in, and he went down with us to the Caribbean for about a week, and I would tell him about the ship and turnover items. And we're standing up on the bridge wing, and I tell him this story I'm telling you. This is 1991 now. And he goes, and he had been in the chief of chaplain's office in some administrative way. He was another lieutenant, a junior guy. And he said, "Oh, so you're the one." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Oh, man, it went around the whole Pentagon about this young chaplain who took on President Clinton and moved the Senate Armed Forces Committee to take a stance against gays in the military." And I laughed and howled. I didn't know what was going on in the Pentagon, but anyways, that was my story where I had to take a stand against it. Um, and here I am, 25, 30 years later, getting on to the hot button issues of homosexuality, women's ordination, Aimee Byrd, and men and women in ordination. So that's my story. I didn't know I hadn't told you, but I was scared going in because you get ambushed for that kind of thing. And at the time, by the way, we had a chief of chaplains, a Roman priest who was known. He was chief, 2-star
Mhm.
admiral. He was known to be a fudge packer. Um, it was, I'd say 2 out of every 3 Roman priests I knew were fudge packers. And they knew each other and they joked among themselves about it. And it was private and you couldn't say anything because back in that day, if you were caught being a fudge packer, you'd be court-martialed.
Well, to end up today, I just want to rehash what I think it is, and this is just my humble opinion. What you are talking about, Donald, is the fruits of postmodernism, of subjectivity.
Ah,
It is ultimately deriving from Romanticism, the Second Great Awakening, and the Frankfurt School's infiltration of everything in America, cultural Marxism. The idea that your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth, and you are allowed to have your truth and I'm allowed to have my truth, where the church must come down strongly, firmly, unapologetically, and militantly is on objective truth, because that is where the church has always stood. That's why we need the liturgy. That's why we need the catechism. I don't care if people are bored with the liturgy. I don't like to take my pills, but I got to for my blood pressure and my cholesterol.
yeah.
I hate broccoli, but I eat it anyway because I know it's good for me. Going through the liturgy, memorizing the catechism, daily Bible reading, holding to these things is objectively, factually true
Yeah.
is going to be the only thing that corrects it. And what you see with people like Byrd and what you see with people like Johnson is there are abusive subjectivists in the seminaries and at the top of these denominations that allow them to think that their opinions and their feelings trump God's truth. And they are nothing more than abused children.
And Aimee Byrd accuses the OPC of ecclesiastical abuse.
And they do, just not the way she thinks it is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, we should get going here.
All right, I'll talk at you on Friday, Donald.
Always helpful. Talk to you later, and we'll see if we get like 150 hits on our last one. So
Well, I apologize for using four-letter words and getting fired up. I get mad about this stuff the more I think about it.
that's all right. I'm an old military guy. We have our own language too.
All right, we'll talk at you later.
Bye bye.
Bye.